people, looks like most people that will be attending are in the meeting. So I just wanted to say hello and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for attending our introductory webinar last week, for those of you who were there, and welcome to everyone that's here today to learn a little bit more about the innovation grant opportunity as part of the New York Digital Inclusion Fund. So taking a look at the agenda, we're going to briefly describe the organizations involved in developing this opportunity, where the idea came from, and why it's critical for New Yorkers everywhere. Then we'll jump into a detailed explanation of the innovation grants and their eligibility and what folks can expect during the application process. We'll hold about 15 to 20 minutes at the end of this call to answer any and all of your questions about this specific grant opportunity. So please be sure to take notes during the presentation so we can follow up on those questions at the end. Next slide, please. So for those of you who have been to other sessions, this will sound a bit familiar, but for those of you who are new, welcome. And as a bit of background on myself, my name is Nuha Saho. I work as an analyst at Schmidt Futures, and I've worked here over the past year to develop this initiative in partnership with the team at the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I'm a New York native who's really excited about the chance to collaborate with many of the organizations on this call to help improve the lives of our community members long term. Just a brief background on Schmidt Futures. Schmidt Futures is a philanthropic initiative founded by Wendy and Eric Schmidt that considers itself a venture facility for public benefit. And as I like to describe, this just means that we're in the business of trying to use the capital that we do have to apply leverage to investments that may not otherwise be valued as profitable, at least in the short term, by government or communities. And we also want to make an investment in the digital inclusion ecosystem that is going to serve kind of as an infrastructure for even greater resource allocation in the future from those very entities. And so the reason why Schmidt Futures is leading this initiative comes directly from our work on the Reimagine New York Commission. You've been on the other calls, you've heard me explain this before, but essentially starting in last May of 2020, former Governor Cuomo put together a commission headed by leaders from different industries in New York to rethink how to build back better from COVID. And the vertical that I kind of was focused on was concerning connectivity related issues. So broadband, digital literacy, and digital inclusion writ large. And so we spent time during that year writing policy memos, working with the government to create innovative partnership models or network pilots within local communities across New York State. Many of those grantees are also on this call, so it's really exciting. And as the commission began to wrap up, Schmidt Futures wanted to create a model for supporting digital inclusion in the state that the state could eventually follow by bringing together stakeholders in the community and the digital inclusion ecosystem to align on an archetype for how digital inclusion partnerships could really function. And so the purpose of this grant opportunity over the next few years will be to kind of seed the beginnings of that infrastructure. I'll pass it off to my colleagues at Ndia for a brief intro on their work as well.
Okay, welcome everyone. My name is, and thank you for being here. It's a Friday afternoon, so thank you so much for joining us. My name is Gina Cooper-Benjamin. I'm the Deputy Director at the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, or NDIA. We're leaning into this very important digital equity moment, so we're excited to be a part of this initiative. NDIA is a unified voice for home broadband access, personal devices, and local technology training and tech support. We're a community of digital inclusion practitioners and advocates. We provide spaces and opportunities for practitioners to meet and discuss what's happening in their local communities. Some of these opportunities include our annual Net Inclusion Conference, community calls, working groups, and a robust listserv. We take what we learn and we create resources that we provide using an open source model on our website. So you can visit digitalinclusion.org and have access to any range of things, resources. We also use what we learn to advocate for our community. We represent over 600 affiliates across the country, and that includes Washington, D.C. and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and 44 states. Our affiliates include nonprofit organizations, municipal governments, local libraries, regional libraries, colleges and universities, housing authorities, Our positions on based on the work of our affiliates, the work that you do on the ground every day. We do a lot of work on the state and local levels to uplift digital inclusion activities and work. Locally, we have trailblazers. It's our honor roll of local initiatives. New York City is on that list. At the state level, we have the Digital Equity Scorecard. The scorecard assesses state efforts based on 6 criteria, and you can see each state's core and best practices for state digital inclusion efforts. We have an affiliates map. So if you visit our webpage, the webpage for the affiliates map, you can see the other affiliates in New York State. We have Digital Inclusion Week coming up October 4th through 8th, so please save those dates. And for those of you new to the work, we also have our Digital Inclusion Startup Manual. Before we hear more about the innovation grants, I want to share some definitions. So digital equity, when we talk about digital equity, we're talking about individuals and communities who have the capacity for full participation in society, democracy, and in the economy. Digital equity is our goal. That's where we're trying to get. Digital inclusion are the activities necessary for full participation. So when we talk about affordable home broadband, that is really important, especially for low-income households. So in the state of New York, according to the American Community Surveys, if you make more than 75K, only 4.5% of households do not have a household broadband subscription. But if you make it less than 20K, that number jumps to 36.2% of households who do not have a home broadband subscription. When we talk about appropriate devices, we mean sometimes more than just your cell phone. A device that's appropriate for accessing the internet and getting the things done you need to get done in the digital world. When we talk about digital literacy, we're talking about digital skills that people need to get on the internet and to explore digital spaces. And then tech support, we're talking about repeated one-on-one interactions with trusted digital navigators, people who understand assets and communities, who understand how to assess the needs, and who can help community members problem solve and point them to solutions. Now I'm going to let Ndia and Christy provide an overview of the Digital Inclusion Innovation Grants and share how the digital inclusion activities may show up in this opportunity.
Thanks for explaining that, Gina. And I think what's important about what Gina said about the distinction between digital equity and digital inclusion, it comes directly into why we decided to name this the Digital Inclusion Fund, which is because the fund is meant to really support those activities. And so we're trying to bring you all together to actually execute on those because we know that we don't currently live in a state of digital equity, as I'm sure all of you know as well. A bit of background on the problems in the digital inclusion space that we noticed that brought us to this place. First and foremost, we realized after talking to a bunch of stakeholders throughout the state that most organizations that work on digital inclusion in New York State operate in what we call silos without much structured opportunity to combine resources for a collective impact model. And so a lot of organizations work in the same communities or with the same populations, but there's not much room for coordination, mostly due to a lack of funding, but also kind of an information deficit on who else is in this space, who else is working on these things, and how you can partner together. And so we realized that most organizations, because of this, are tackling the digital divide by only addressing one element of the problem. And the digital inclusion ecosystem really lacks what we call a collective impact model. So this is truly the goal and the purpose of the Digital Inclusion Fund, to support a set of initiatives to increase the scale and impact of digital inclusion work serving vulnerable populations. And Christy will go over the vulnerable populations in a second, but in particular, the innovation grant opportunity is really meant to bring together groups of 2 to 5 stakeholder groups working in collaboration to offer new or expanded digital inclusion resources in their communities. So this could look like, just for example, it could look like a public housing authority partnering with a local CBO that provides skills training or device lending opportunities to residents, that also offers technical support through a neighborhood library. And so we want folks to get really creative here. and think, think about how you can use this competitive grant to really show your creativity, your innovation, and your desired impact in your local and statewide communities. So I will pass it off to Christy to give more details on the grant opportunity and eligibility.
Thank you. Thanks, Nuha. I'm Christy Zappe Faradino, Program Director at Ndia, and I'm really excited to be here with you guys today. So I guess it was a couple days ago, we talked about the coalition planning grants. And so today I want to talk to you about the digital inclusion innovation grants, who's eligible, what the expectations are for the grantees, what would be a successful grant proposal, what we're looking for, what the grant period is, and the range of grant awards. Next slide, please. So who's eligible to apply for this grant? We're looking for 501c3 organizations who are New York State based, meaning they are operating and active in New York State. We want that applicant to be the lead for digital inclusion on this grant. So as Nuha said, the goal here is to bring as many partners to the table as possible, but we need one person as the primary contact for the grant application, and that person must be a 501c3 organization. And we're looking for you all to partner with any other org who works on digital inclusion or wants to. And this could be the community-based organizations that you're so familiar with, that you represent, such as nonprofits, cultural groups, libraries, etc. Just as in the coalition grants, we're looking for you all to serve the same population with these innovation grants, which would be immigrants and refugees, English language learners, formerly or currently incarcerated individuals, housing insecure individuals, or those experiencing homelessness, low-income households, people with disabilities, job seekers, and older adults 65 years or older. And as you can see, that population is pretty broad. And it's really important that as you're putting your project proposal together, that you do address how you're reaching those priority populations and why. And it can be more than one population. It could be all of those populations, since our communities are made up of so many different types of people. So the next slide. So the goal of the Digital Inclusion Innovation Grants is really to give you an opportunity to go big with a collective impact model. We basically want to use this New York Digital Inclusion Fund to increase the number of households who have access to broadband, have the devices that they need in order to participate fully, and have the skills. So we want them to have broadband, devices, and the skills. What we really are looking for in the grant proposals is these innovation partnerships. We're looking for new ideas, novel approaches, so that we're getting more services to people who didn't have them before this fund was announced. And I can't stress enough the idea of the collaboration. And that's why we had you repeat in the chat who you are, who you're with, what your contact information is. Next slide. So the grant term is 12 or...
Christy, I'm sorry, I just wanted to interject. Are folks having trouble hearing Christy, or is the audio a bit off? Just curious if other folks are experiencing this as well.
You can hear.
Okay.
You can hear, okay.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you, just checking.
Thank you. Let me move my phone. You know, sometimes there's interference, so I'll just put it on the other side of the desk. So if you can't hear me, just go ahead and make a note in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll repeat what I had said during the Q&A. So the really exciting thing about this grant opportunity is you can determine what you want that grant period to be. Do you want it to be 12 months or 24 months? And that also gives you the flexibility to ask for a grant that can range from $50,000 to $250,000. We, again, are looking for a collaborative approach for you to bring as many people together and serve as many people as possible. But this grant is not tied to funding one group in each economic development region, just like it was in the coalition. So remember, the coalition planning grants, we want one per economic development region. For this, we do not. We anticipate there will be a second round of funding for the innovation grants in the fall of 2022, so about 1 year from now. You have the opportunity to apply for both rounds, this one and the next one. So be thinking about that as you are formulating what you want to ask for and what your project is to be looking like. So the expectations are that you attend all of the online meetings. We would have at least 3 meetings per year. We also would have regular check-in meetings, and NDIA will be leveraging our subject matter expertise and our thought partners and our affiliates and our staff to provide training and technical assistance around the work that you're going to be doing in your community around digital inclusion, programming, and services. And for this grant term, since it is 1 year or 2 years, there will be an interim and final reports that are due. Next slide. So I wanted to also give you some general information about the request for proposals for the innovation grants. This is the high level. So we're going to be asking you for a narrative that will have you outline the description of your proposed digital inclusion services, how many community members you anticipate serving in this 12 to 24 month period, 12 or 24 month period, who are the partners that are committed to participating and supporting the work that you're doing. How will you determine what a successful intervention will look like? And then if there's going to be any anticipated barriers for you implementing this project in your community and how you would address those. And then how you determined what these community needs are. So what is that evidence? So we know that you did your due diligence in assessing what is needed in your community as you write up your project proposal. And then just as before, we want to know what your long-term sustainability plan is. The New York Digital Inclusion Fund is really giving you the seed to start that work, but it is our hope that this work continues even after the grant period, after you have received that funding, then a detailed budget. All of the requests for proposals are going to be reviewed by an independent panel of judges with a select set of criteria that will be available to you to review. Schmidt Futures will be determining who the final grantees will be. The applications will open in the middle of September, and all grantees will be notified by the middle of December. And then what we're looking for specifically in these proposals is the diverse mix of partners and the amount of digital inclusion services that you're going to be providing into your community and what that impact is going to be of those services. We want to get as much as we can into these communities with these grants. Next slide. Thank you. And the last thing I want to talk about is our letter of intent. So we're really looking to do some matchmaking here, just as we were in the earlier grant that we had talked about earlier this week. We want to have as many people work together as possible to really leverage the investment in communities throughout New York State. So we will have the letter of intent posted on our website on August 31st. It will be accepted from September 1st to September 8th. And we will use about a week or so to kind of go through those LOIs and reach out to people to encourage you to submit a grant together. So that's kind of the general information on the letter of intent. We will open up to questions in just a few minutes. And do know any question that you ask us, we're incorporating into some FAQs that will be on our website to guide you. So with that, I'm going to flip it over to Gina. Actually, do you want me to go through this one, Gina, or do you want to go through it?
You can go through it, Christy.
Sure. Okay. So the timeline, just as I mentioned, the letter of intent will be posted on our website in early September, September 1st. The request for proposals will open up in the middle of October. In the middle of September. All proposals due in the middle of October. So you have about a month to draft that. And then we will make grant announcements of who the selected grantees are in late December. And then we will kick this off in the new year in January 2022. So with that, I'm going to open it up to my colleagues, Gina and Nuha, to go through any questions that you all might have.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you, Nuha. If you have any questions, you can either post them to the Q&A, which I see a few popping in now, or you can post them to chat. So we can kind of go through them together, but if we're looking at the Q&A, there's the first question from Nancy is, can local governments be a partner, not the lead? Nuha, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So yes, local governments can be a partner, not the lead. Exactly. But that's exactly what the answer is. We would encourage folks to partner with their local government in either of our grants. We think that it could only be helpful, but again, in terms of making it easy for compliance on our side to give this money, it would be easier if it was a 501c3 as the lead.
Thanks, Nuha. So the next question, are youth considered a priority population or only older adults? That's from Ambrain.
Yeah, so just to give a brief background on why we didn't necessarily include youth immediately. So youth do fall under low-income folks, right? So there are ways to interpret our priority populations to include youth, but the reason why we specified older adults and folks maybe that are eligible for workforce development programs is because we felt like there wasn't that much of a focus on skills training or digital literacy for those populations as much as there were youth with other resources such as schools and potentially school libraries and local libraries. And so it definitely will not give you a penalty to talk about how you're impacting youth, but we would definitely like to see how older adults that are, not a part of any institutions really impacted by this work. So the next question is, are rural populations included as a priority? And so, I mean, by the nature of us opening this up for the entirety of New York State, we're definitely interested in supporting rural populations throughout the state. We know that a lot of grant dollars flow to major cities, especially in the state, and so would really encourage folks from rural areas to apply. Oh, let's see. So Christy, do you want to take this? It says on slide 11, do you mind repeating what the LT, long-term stands for in long-term sustainability plan?
Yes. So as I mentioned, this is an initial investment that Schmidt Futures is putting forward. We want to know what your plan is once this funding is spent. What is your plan to ensure that the services that you are providing continues after the grant period? So what is your long-term plan to secure funding to continue the program or service that you're implementing in New York State?
Okay, let us know also in the comments if you feel like we don't adequately answer your question. Christy, I thought that was great. This is not a call out. I'm just, because I can't get feedback immediately from the folks that asked. And so please let us know if there's any follow-up to those questions that we could help answer. So I think, Gina, maybe you can answer this next one of where do I find info? A couple of folks are asking, if they missed the other webinars, how do they know the distinction between the two types of grant opportunities on the Digital Inclusion Fund? Can they get any follow-up?
Of course, I can definitely answer those. My computer is acting wonky right now. It does this sometimes, but I will, we have a web page, so I'm going to try to get to the web page. Actually, I know the web page. A web page and an email address. So the email address you should definitely send your messages to nydifund@digitalinclusion.org. I'm going to type that in the chat for y'all. Give me 1 second. And that email address is being monitored by us.
And while you do that, I can kind of explain again, if folks missed it, the differences between the two funds and to answer the question of, can an organization apply for both grants? So the difference is essentially with the coalition building grants, we essentially want to bring together to catalyze the development of digital inclusion coalitions in each of New York's 10 economic development regions. We want at least to support one in each. And so these kind of grants are going to be, they're 6-month grants worth up to $30,000 that are going to go towards kind of building that initial infrastructure for those coalitions or expanding on already existing infrastructure. And the difference between these grants and those is that those will probably have a lot more partners in general, right? I'm not saying a lot more people will have to split the money in that situation, because again, it can be a few orgs doing that groundwork, the coordination work, being the liaisons. But for the innovation grant, we explicitly want, a really like small group of folks, so 2 to 5 groups of organizations working together, using the funds over the 12 or 24-month period to kind of create a local partnership collaborative. So that doesn't necessarily need to have only local partners, because that this grant isn't tied to those economic development regions. You can find partners from all across the state and just come together to collaborate on something. I will say that there isn't much benefit in applying for both grants, and let me explain it this way. So we have 1 round of the coalition building grants and 2 rounds of the innovation grants. So what will happen is that essentially when we open applications in mid-September, we're going to open applications for both types of grants. So let's say you're applying as a part of, for an innovation grant with a small group of folks, and then you want to apply it as a lead for a strategic coalition building grant. We don't think that there's that much of an advantage of applying as the lead. You may apply with other organizations and indicate that, and they can indicate that you will be a part of their coalition that they're building and you'll be working with them. But we don't really see that much benefit, since the grants are starting at the exact same time, and it's going to be a lot of coordination work on your end. Just kind of tying in a different question of, who's getting the money essentially. So whoever the lead organization of that 501c3 is will get the money, but they also have to outline to us how they're planning to distribute those funds throughout their partners in the innovation grant. So if you have a partnership with 5 folks and you're the main one applying, and you include the name and the contact information of the other folks applying with you in your collaborative group, you must also illustrate what you're intending to do with those funds. So yeah, we definitely want to know where the money is going and to whom. And no, sorry, just to finish off on this question, do lead organizations need to be of a certain size in terms of budget? No, there isn't a requirement. If you can demonstrate to us through our application questions that it's a reasonable ask, the amount of money you're requesting, and that you can handle it, that should not be a problem.
Thank you, Nuha.
To add to that, because there was a follow-up on that. So the lead organization doesn't need to be a certain size in terms of your annual budget. If you're going in partnership with somebody to do digital inclusion services, you would have, and that organization was going to be providing services, yes, you would need to sub-grant the grant funds that you receive from Schmidt Futures to cover the cost of whatever that other partner's doing. So if they're doing like digital literacy training for 2 weeks for seniors, and you're saying that's going to be $2,500, you're responsible to re-grant that money. You're the lead and you're responsible for distributing that.
Okay.
Yeah, so sorry, just because Lawrence's question is kind of related, but we won't tell you how to split the money. Essentially, that is actually going to be a part of your proposal, right? We're curious to see like, how are you leveraging these other organizations and their expertise, and therefore how much are you going to plan to redistribute to those organizations to continue to work with you. And I see some questions about, distributing the chat, the presentations, and yes, Gina, to my understanding, we are planning to follow up with folks with those links to those that information.
We'll definitely share the chat and the links following this presentation. So they'll be on the webpage that I shared. I'll share it again just in case you didn't see that, and will go out via email.
Gotcha.
The Digital Inclusion Fund webpage.
This is a really interesting question. So Okay, someone asked this in the chat. I should have actually answered it earlier, as this is the second time I see it. So have any similar calls been issued by NDIA in the past, or what type of projects has NDIA previously funded? I will let NDIA speak to this since you have the expertise here.
Sure. So we have participated in work like this before, but not to this scale. These are very large dollar grants. We did do another project with Grow with Google for the UGMA project, where 6 of NDIA's affiliates each received $25,000 to leverage Grow with Google resources to train and upskill predominantly Black communities. But again, that was 6. We're looking at, this is a much larger scale project. Anything to add to that, Gina?
No, I think that was it. You covered it.
Okay, great. And I want to go back to the budget because I don't think we answered the whole question because another person asked. If we partner with a local nonprofit, do we have to submit a combined budget? Yes. So your budget must outline how you anticipate using all of the grant funds that you are requesting.
I think this question came up in the chat and the Q&A, but should the letter of intent include the partners we plan to work with, or will we be connected to partners based on the letter of intents that are submitted? So the purpose of the letter of intent is I'll say the primary purpose is for us as the folks that will be eventually reviewing this and the advisory board to get a sense of literally what's the traffic going to be, how many people are actually applying so that we can best prepare ourselves. That's kind of like item 1. The second intent of it is to really connect folks that don't have partnerships or are looking for additional partners to make their proposal stronger. And so it serves a couple of different purposes. And so I would say that for all, we're looking at getting everyone to apply, submit the letter of intent, even if you already know the exact partners you're going to work with. We just want to understand who's coming together. And most importantly, it's really going to be beneficial for folks that, let's say, are applying solo or have one more partner, but are looking for others to fill in other digital inclusion services that they can't fill in. And then so we'll be able to connect you all later together by kind of sharing, who else has submitted the letter of intent and indicated that they're open to partnerships. You'll get kind of a list of those folks, the organization's name, their email address, their website, a short blurb on how they're interested in making an impact. So the organization will sign up and say, hey, we provide refurbished devices, for example. And so when you get this list, if you're interested in partnering with someone like that, we'll leave it to you folks to follow up with each other directly, because you'll have the contact information and better than anyone else what exactly you're looking for and the type of organizations you want to partner with. So that's how that process will go forward, but please follow up with any more questions if I didn't adequately answer that.
I think
so.
Sorry.
I say a call out to Lawrence Lombard and Sloan Markley. If we didn't answer your question, just re-ask it.
And then Heidi, did you cover this Heidi question? Can planning for a project be a grant proposal?
Oh no, I haven't covered that yet. So the answer here is no. So for our coalition building grants, that is essentially a planning grant, right? We're giving folks money to bring people together to assess needs and to do a needs assessment and then create a proposal. Here, we actually want you to come with a project that's ready to go, since this funding will be for about a year or 2 years. And so the expectation here is that these projects, these proposals are going to be ready to hit the ground running. We're not saying that there couldn't be a planning component within the grant, right? If you say, hey, I'm going to spend the first 2 months kind of doing a problem definition phase or a research phase, and then we're going to jump into doing X, Y, and Z just to make sure we're right about the type of solution we want to implement in this community. That makes sense to me. No worries. And
is actually, oh, sorry, keep going, Nuha.
No, that was all for me.
I think the next one is a good question. Can a university serve as the lead organization?
That is a really good question. That is a really good question. I don't think I have a perfect answer for that right now. It really depends on university tax filing status and how difficult that could be for our grants team. But that's something I'd actually have to check back in on. So Yeah, right. So some universities have foundations that can act as, some universities already have vehicles that can essentially act as that shadow organization that can receive those funds. So please check in with that. But we'd really like it to be a 501c3. I can follow up on that as well if there's any requests for that. I see a question in the chat about, is workforce development a priority? So to give a brief background, when we first started speaking to stakeholders, especially digital literacy instructors throughout the state, one thing that we'd learned was that workforce development is often a priority when people say digital inclusion. And while we do support workforce development, and there are a lot of folks that work with workforce development programs that will be applying, and we encourage you to do so, we realize that oftentimes digital inclusion is not outcomes based in terms of economic opportunity is often not valued as much as digital inclusion programs that just support, increased quality of life for folks. So that it's not a necessary component at all for anything to be a workforce development program. So yeah, we're kind of going along the whole range. We want to be able to support folks that are just looking to use digital inclusion services to improve quality of life as well.
There's a question, so there are a few, but I think, so I think a good one to answer, this is actually an important question to clarify, can we add or change partners after submitting an LOI?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, that's not the formal application. That's just kind of you letting us know, hey, we're thinking about applying. We're probably going to, here are the folks we're coming in with, but that it doesn't necessarily need to match the final application actually.
Exactly. And then another question, will guidelines issued on the application elements, format, length, budget, items, etc. be available? Yes. We posted on the webpage with the request for proposal instructions. All those details will be available to you.
Great question. I see something in the chat. How many grants will be given, or what is the total pool of funds? This is a really good question. So unlike the coalition grants where we're looking to seed around 10 of those grants to match kind of to go along with kind of the 10 economic development regions, here we're very open. The range of grants, again, like we said, is $50,000 to $250,000 for either a 12-month or a 24-month grant with those partners. And so we don't necessarily have a strict amount. That's a range, but here, this is really a competitive grant process. And so we're just looking for the best ideas with kind of the best proposal, right? So we're looking to see how much pre-work you've done to identify the problem and why your solution actually really makes sense here. And yeah, so to the question about, submitting 2 letters of intent, if you're considering applying for both grant opportunities, that's a good question. I think you should. I don't think you should indicate it on both. We'll probably not make it able to select both, just because you're probably going to come in with a different set of partners for each grant opportunity. And so, yes, if you're interested in applying for both, I would, but it's not likely that we would support the same organization for both type of grants, just because we're really trying to get a diverse set of grantees funded.
I just want to add one more point, just to be clear. We will be sending out a letter of intent process with a form, so just in case anyone thinks that they have to just come up with something on their own, just we'll send out a form for you to fill out.
Definitely.
For everyone who registered for any of the 3 webinars, we will email you when that letter of intent is posted on the website. We'll also email you when the application's open in the middle of September, so you're not having to go back and check our website. So you will get at least those 2 communications from us.
I see a question about, if you submit a letter of intent and find another partner that did not submit on the letter of intent, can they still be the lead? Yes, that's not a problem at all. We're just, again, trying to get a gauge of who's applying, and then also provide folks that are interested in partnership with an array of kind of potential partners as well. Someone asked kind of related to devices, because I keep using that as an example. I got to get more diverse on that. So they asked, should we think about giving devices to people or loaning devices to people? That's a great question. I'll leave that up to you all. Honestly, I've seen there's so many different types of device lending or device giving programs. We won't tell you which one is better. Everything has its own context and reason for its design. And so, yeah, I don't think there's any like bias in terms of which program is best. It just, if it matches your proposal and it makes sense to what you're trying to do, include it in your grant or include it in your proposal.
There's another LOI question. If someone submits an LOI and then finds another partner that did not submit an LOI later to be the lead, can they still apply as a lead? And I think the answer to that question is yes, but I'll let you go. You answer that one now.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, I remember this question. So yes, essentially it's not, we won't kind of like, we won't hold you to that until you submit the RFP actually. I see the next question in the chat is it detrimental if the target audience is extremely broad, i.e. global, as long as the project clearly demonstrates benefits to the groups listed in the call? Could Roberta, could you clarify that in the chat? As in, when you say extremely broad and global, do you mean global outside of New York State? Because this is definitely going to have to be focused in New York State, but the populations can be global in that sense. So it can be a broad range of priority populations within, as long as it's within New York State, the impact is happening. Are we looking for a certain number of people served per population? That's a really good question as well. Sorry, per proposal. No, the answer is no. It really, one thing I will say though, is that the amount of people that are impacted should probably correlate to the amount of funding you're requesting, right? And so everything is going to be kind of judged on its own and through its own contextual features. And so just because you are applying for a $50,000 grant, but impacting 1,000 people doesn't necessarily mean that that's a better proposal than, you know, someone that's applying for $250,000 and more people, but it's still relative, you know what I mean? So yeah, let me know if there's any follow-ups on that question, but it's a good question. Yeah, I see Roberta followed up to say that, you know, providing education relevant to folks across the globe. So Christy, Gina, maybe you can jump in here, but the way I understand it is that, you know, if you're, for example, NDIA, if you're an organization that does create resources that can serve people broader than the intended target population, that totally makes sense as long as the intention was to work with New Yorkers and impact New Yorkers. Like, of course, your resources are probably going to be useful beyond New York State, at least we hope one day, right? These are at the end of the day pilot programs, but the intention should definitely be centered in New York State, just because of where this fund came out of was the work in conjunction with the Reimagine New York Commission, although this is a Schmidt Futures-led initiative.
I agree with you, Nuha.
Gotcha. These are great questions. Keep them coming, please. Oh, and I like this question a lot. Can the project in the RFP be different than the project in the letter of intent if we make changes in our initially proposed project? Absolutely. Again, we're not going to hold you to that strictly. The letter of intent is really going to be a good way to identify folks that are interested in partnerships. And so, yeah, I'd leave it at that. Max grant for 2 years is $250,000. Yes, that is correct. The max grant is $250,000. Oh, sorry, I should clarify. When we give these numbers, at the end of the day, they're averages, right? And we're trying to give a range. This is, you know, called the innovation grant for a reason. If we see a proposal that is innovative enough that warrants and needs more than $250,000, apply with the budget you have in mind, right? If we need to scale back we should scale back, but also apply knowing that what the average size of the grant is. So don't apply for a $500,000 grant if you know the average is capped around 250. But again, don't limit yourselves to these exact numbers just because we get it. If you're bringing in additional partners and the work is very broad and impactful, it can get expensive, but we would work with you there. And the $250,000 would be for whatever the grant period you're applying for. So if you're applying for a 12-month grant and you're applying for $250,000, just make sure that that's not the exact same grant that you would apply for a 2-year program, right, for $250,000. The amount of money you're requesting at the end of the day needs to match the impact that you're proposing is what I'm trying to say. Oh, and I don't think we talked about this enough, but again, there are 2 cycles for this grant application. And so even if your RFP isn't approved this time around, we're going to be opening up another opportunity like this in the beginning, or sorry, latest fall of 2022. And so that'll be really a great time to also plan to apply for these funds. And I see a question about, can public housing residents as a class, oh, great question. Can public housing residents as a class be considered a target population? I would say absolutely, since they fall within the income range that would classify them as low income folks. And I'm sure they probably also identify with a couple of the other indicators or priority population indicators that we've mentioned above. So that makes sense. And the question is, how will money be allocated to organizations? Will it be in one lump sum or in installments? The answer is one lump sum. I would be curious if anyone would be requesting money in installments on purpose, but definitely the default is one lump sum to be divided. Okay. If we are awarded in this round, are we eligible for the second round? The answer to that is that you're not eligible for the second round, right? We would like to be able to support digital inclusion resources in many communities across New York State. And so we'd be looking to prioritize folks that haven't initially received funds initially, but that doesn't mean that a proposal wouldn't make sense. The next question is, are there any types of budget expenses that are frowned upon or excluded? We haven't, I would not say that that's true, just because this is pretty broad, and whatever you need to be funded to make your program successful, as long as it's directly connected to the program and makes sense. We've heard a lot in the beginning, especially speaking to different nonprofits, that oftentimes when you get funding, you're kind of down to the wire, and essentially there's not enough flexibility when it comes to funding. And that's why we're giving the option for these 2-year grants, especially because we understand that sometimes it takes a year to get the program off the ground, or sometimes you need to spend money on miscellaneous items to actually to prepare your staff to be the best that they can be, to make your program the best it can be. And so that will probably be on a case-by-case basis if we are trying to exclude certain types of expenses, but for now, I would say include everything. Is the reimbursement on expense basis? So I don't particularly understand this question. Christy or Gina, could you explain if you understand, is the reimbursement on expense basis?
It is there. We are, again, whatever you need for your program, you're getting one lump sum. If you are asking your partners to reimburse for metro or subway expenses to get to meetings, that's on you. That's for you to figure out. But there will be no receipts or things sent to NDIA or Schmidt Futures to reimburse for. All must come out of your budget. I don't know what IDC means. So if you could clarify that, somebody, Charlisa. Overhead. Okay. Yes.
So the standard overhead, I think this is pretty standard with other funders as well, is about 10%. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're capped at that much if you can support why it's more is necessary. So yeah, you can think about this pretty broadly. I'll take these last two questions before we drop. These have been amazing so far, and I hope they've been really helpful for the folks that are listening in. So the first one is, will you provide support for project sustainability past the project period? So for example, connection to other funding opportunities or other resources. The first thing I'll say is that during the actual grant period for grantees, they'll be getting an extensive amount of technical assistance and support from our folks at Ndia. This will be laid out later as well when folks are applying, but we do have hours that will be allocated on a monthly basis for project support. And so you will definitely have assistance. Going forward, when the grant period is ending, either for the coalition grants or these innovation grants, we're gonna ask grantees to identify, what is the long-term funding sustainability plan for your initiative. So we're gonna help you identify key stakeholders in your community, whether that's local government, other funders in your community, and to be able to articulate before you complete the grant what you're going to do in order to make your project sustainable or get funds for other initiatives that you're thinking about. The last question that I'll answer today, sadly, is why has Schmidt Futures picked New York State? I want to be biased and say it's because I live here and I work for Schmidt Futures. That's not the truth. So when I joined the Schmidt Futures team, like I mentioned, we were working on something called the Reimagine New York Commission. Our founder, Eric Schmidt, was the chairman of this Reimagine New York Commission. And so we work really, really closely with state government to try to kind of increase broadband affordability, broadband adoption, and in general, digital inclusion resources throughout the state. And so while we were finishing up that the commission related work back in March, we were thinking ahead about, okay, can the state make an investment in creating its own digital inclusion fund? And at that time, this is literally, we're still in the pandemic, but this was literally the height of the pandemic. The state just could not allocate funds in this exact fiscal year to an initiative like that. And so at Schmidt Futures, we kind of said, well, this is kind of a commission it came out of a recommendation from the commission to the governor's office. And essentially, we just wanted to follow up on that recommendation and say, well, we're really deep into this work, especially in New York State. We can start it ourselves and hopefully create the infrastructure for the state to actually take the baton in another year and to make this a more sustainable, state-funded, state-recognized program. So it definitely does not end with what we're doing here between Schmidt Futures and Ndia, but it's starting with New York State and starting with the example that you are all setting. So thank you very much for attending this. This has been really fun to just kind of answer these questions. I'm really excited to see your proposals for this grant opportunity. We'll follow up via email to everyone that has signed up as well with more information when the letter of intent is announced and the RFP is opened up. So best of luck to folks, and please reach out to nydifund@digitalinclusion.org with any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us.